All right, Matt. Well, thank you for coming on the webinar
Yeah,
series.
of course. Yeah.
You're our senior facilitator. So Matt Dawson, senior facilitator. What does that title mean?
Well,
Yeah.
I like the word facilitator as
Yeah.
opposed to trainer or other things because the way I try and run these sessions is I really like group discussion. I think that's where the good stuff is. So I try and facilitate people getting involved and being active. So that's what it means to me.
And how long have you been doing it for, just so we can get up to speed? How long have you been doing this role for?
I've been with Alitrust or Through Safety for over 4 years now.
4 years?
Yeah. So, but in my previous life, I was also involved in instruction. So I guess you might argue maybe 20, 30 years now.
Yeah. And you kind of have a unique approach to your when you deliver the course, the Through Safety course. Walk us through kind of how you approach a group, what you care about most when you're walking in the door for the first time, shaking someone's hand. What is your approach, Matt?
Boy, so I think there's a lot there. But really, I want people to be comfortable. I want them to be themselves. I'm very upfront. I'm not here to talk about right and wrong. I'm not here to tell you what to do, what not to do. I call myself a behaviorist, so I look at human behavior. And what I'm after is everyone in the group trying to understand their behavior, why they do it. And once we start getting to the whys, we can start addressing the outcomes. So that's very much how I run it is, hey, let's really dig into the whys behind what we do.
Right.
And then, if I understand your why, then I can speak to you directly and say, hey, Jordan, I noticed this is what's going on. Help me understand you. Let me help me better understand your values, your decision-making process. Then we can understand the outcomes, and then we can get to that. So I approach the training very much that way, is very individual. We're here to understand ourselves and better understand others and ultimately work well together.
So you mentioned behaviorist. That's a very specific thing. I haven't really heard that term spoken very often.
Yeah.
How did you kind of find that was a key or was a core value of yours?
Yeah, so I always look to the behavior. So particularly in this field, a lot of things we talk about is, let's have technologies that help keep us safe. Let's have policies or procedures that help keep us safe. So all these other things. And my core belief, in fact, in our own company, we have these discussions. Yeah. My core belief is
every company, right?
Right. Yeah, but particularly ours, because we're trying to keep people safe. So I believe at the core of that is human behavior. So I believe a human will always figure out a way to outsmart technology or bypass a policy or all these other things. So I believe in getting down to the human behavior.
Yeah.
And so it's this field of study or I guess, philosophy that's called behaviorism. So I look to the human behavior and try and understand the behavior we're seeing and why we're seeing it. The core of that is I believe humans have a reason for doing everything we do. But it's often very hidden, and our brain tries to hide that.
Almost?
Subconscious. And when we actively try to hide it from ourselves.
Interesting.
Right? So speeding, right?
Yeah.
You're like, it'll be okay because I'm in a hurry. So deep down, we know driving fast is not safe.
Yeah,
so there's the behavior,
yeah.
And then we start sabotaging ourselves. It's like, I'll be okay because I'm a good driver. I've never had a ticket, right? So, but you see, there's a deeper layer here, and so I believe in getting to the deeper layer and saying, well, Matt, come on, you know driving fast isn't the best, so let's get to why you're doing it.
And you're kind of trying to find that why. You're digging down to that level, that subconscious level.
Yeah.
So is there a story there that you're finding that exists? What are you finding when you get to that level with people?
Well, let me phrase that a little different. Because I'm not trying to find out your why.
Okay.
I'm trying to encourage you to find out your why.
Well said.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So then I can come to you, hey, Jordan, this is the behavior I notice. Let's talk about your why. What's your reasoning? And once I understand your reasoning, then I can actually start working very well with you.
So it's almost like you're mentoring somebody into an awareness state, more so than a subconscious state.
Yeah. And that's well said. And I think what we tend to do is we come at people and say, what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah, right.
or that's against policy.
Yeah.
Which is immediately it's I can't think of the word. It's conflict. It's resistance, right?
Yeah.
And you asked to the why. My story is I always really disliked that. And I would always have these reasons for doing things, and then I'd have a supervisor or boss and say, Matt, you're doing it wrong. And I'm like, well, boss, but I have this reason for doing it. Can we at least talk about the reason? And but then what it does is it creates a mutual learning environment, right? Because maybe you've been doing it for 30 years. Maybe I'm a young guy. I come in and like, oh, well, my past experience, this is how we approach this problem. But it opens the table for both of us to learn.
Interesting.
And if you're my boss, then you can also start learning how I do things, my reasoning, and then it just creates a much better working environment, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, well, that's wrong. Policy says do it this way, and we don't ever get, like you said, awareness or understanding of each other.
Yeah.
Which is just conflict
said.
over and over, right?
So kind of in your scenario, kind of if I have 30 years of experience doing a task and you come in and you've done it for maybe a year, there's going to be an inherent conflict that's unspoken. Maybe I know this, you don't know this, or you know it differently than how I know it. And maybe that discussion never takes place. And that can create a void in the workplace where someone can be more upset without any rational reasoning for being that mad. But have you come across scenarios where that was an unknown issue in an organization and you've had to guide them towards a solution?
Yeah.
Is it often or is it?
Well, so again, part of my past is I've done contract work since my late teens. So what that means is I've had 70 or 80 bosses.
At the same time.
Hopefully not at the same time, but sometimes, multiple jobs. But I find that this is, and let me say this, I've lived and worked outside the U.S. for 20 years. So I find this is how humans tend to do things. Is we all just tend to make these assumptions.
Right.
So in our previous scenario, you've been here for 30 years. You come in saying, oh, there's Matt, the young punk, doesn't know anything, these millennials, blah, blah, blah.
That's what they're doing.
And then I walk in and oh, there's Jordan, the ornery old guy. But we never...
Should we switch roles?
I mean, if you want. I kind of like being the young punk, but
I like being old.
Okay, let's keep the rule. But you can see even this real simple example. There's all these cultural overlays. There's all these societal things. There's personal preferences. There's all these things that just never get spoken about, and ultimately, you and I never work well together.
We end up just kind of avoiding each other.
Yeah. Or tolerating, right?
There he is again, and he'll quit one day,
Yeah, right, and that's what I'm thinking, like, oh man, when's retirement for this guy? And really, I'm robbing myself of your knowledge.
Interesting.
And really, you're robbing yourself of my energy and passion, or whatever the circumstances may be.
So when those two opposing parties, let's say, subconsciously opposing parties, combine, they can create a new type of work energy. They can create more output, more production, more, right?
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to measure, right? So when you walk in a room and someone says, how do you help our organization? You say, oh, I do this, this, and this. The results really speak for themselves more than anything. So I'd love to ask you, how has it been seeing results happen? When you go into a room with 14, 15 people and you come back another time, how has it been seeing that transformation?
Yeah, so
as a behaviorist.
So as a behaviorist. And so again, it's my experience is it's never very quick. Now people can be like, oh, that was wonderful training.
It's not a light switch. Okay.
But humans take very long time to change or to implement new behaviors. And so where I'm going is I don't think we really can truly change until we really get to our core values. So now more to your question. I've been working here and doing this long enough that I think I'm just barely beginning to see and receive those results.
Yeah.
It takes years, right? I look at my own life and it's like, okay, if I want to stop driving so fast, I'm going to attack that maybe for 6 months. And then, there's going to be days where I drive faster and those days I'll do better. But the true change is going to take years.
Years of practice.
Years of practice for me to drive better, right? And so I'm just truly starting to see that. And as you said, when we approach clients, that's very much my take is, look, what you're doing is you're paying it forward. Right. And you're building a future for your children and grandchildren. And so I try and frame it that way. Like some people, maybe 1 in 10 or 2 in 10, you'll see a real quick change, but the majority is going to be a very slow process.
Right.
Now, what that gives us, though, when that happens, is in a year or two, you have a completely different company.
For the better, for the better.
For the better, right?
Yeah.
And people show up happy to work.
Yeah.
And people show up, even in manufacturing, it's like, I don't invite Jordan to my birthday party, but man, he's a pretty good old guy and he really has a lot to say. And I instead of just avoiding him and, the unpleasantness of staff meetings, I'll go sit next to him and I'll catch up to him.
Right.
And what that does is it just permeates and it creates a completely different workplace.
So inside the course, I call it more of a discussion, right? It's a discussion. Yeah. What part do you feel stands out the most to you, having delivered and done this with so many people? What in your mind stands out as this is something that's a core part of people's change, from being less safe to more safe? But in general, that behavior side, when is the moment in the course feel like it happens?
So I don't know if there's a specific moment because individuals are so different.
Sure.
What I absolutely love about Through Safety, and that I have never seen in any other organization, is the emotional connection. And I don't believe I don't think we can change until I emotionally connect to it.
Right.
So until I envision what driving fast will give me and how that'll affect my family and my friends, I'll never be truly motivated to ever change that.
Right.
And so in this 2-day, this typical 2-day discussion, what I very intentionally do is have, maybe 7 or 8 opportunities each day for a really deep emotional connection. And to me, that's the game changer of all this.
Yeah.
Now, there's a flip side to that. Emotions are difficult.
Right. They're hard to measure.
They're very hard to measure. And again, we try and shield ourselves from emotions. So when I have me personally, when I have this big emotional experience, it overwhelms my system, and I kind of have to go, whoa, I need some downtime.
Right.
And so to me, that's the real art of facilitating these discussions, is trying to give those emotional moments, then allow for pause and come back, and then we very much come like this, and very much try and up the ante for emotional, and then I'll very intentionally come down, and then we'll come back up. But to me, that's really what makes this so different. Yeah. And I hear hundreds of comments like that. Like,
really?
I love the emotional connection. I felt things that I hadn't felt for years. And from the ornery old guys that have been here for 30 years, they're like, wow, 2 days, it made a difference. It's important to me.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. And the founder, Juanjo Salamanca, he's mentioned how the emotional side is what he's cared about most since the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And we've hit, I don't know how many facilities, how many locations, just yourself alone, hundreds,
Yeah.
But there's always the emotional undertone. So one thing that people might be wondering is how are you becoming that vulnerable with a group every single time? What is giving you that ability to do that? Because you're reaching them at a level that's very difficult.
Yeah. So I can only tell you what I do. I've grown more used to it, but particularly at the beginning, it took me a day or two to emotionally prepare. So really? I can't. If I don't feel those emotions, I don't think I can have you feel those emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So I have to be there by your side saying, man, I'm feeling sad and angry and frustrated along with you. And that's very emotionally draining for me.
It takes a lot of energy.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of these days, I'm exhausted.
Physically exhausted, not just emotionally, physically exhausted.
I would say just emotionally drained.
Okay.
As I've grown more used to presenting or facilitating, it's not quite as demanding physically, but it's not a lot of physical work to stand up and talk, right? The hard part is myself becoming that vulnerable, really talking about my dark, scary, fearful moments and opening it up, so if I open it up and say, hey, I'm willing to talk about this, talking about my children, which are incredibly important to me. Once I open that up, I think you become more much more likely to share. And it's a group setting too, and colleagues. So it's a challenging thing, but that's what I try to become a master at.
And I feel like you touched on something important, is that there's that imbalance of energy and experience. Sometimes there's not a crossover, but I think there's always an assumption being made before you go into the room with people, is that everybody here is just trying to get through this training. Right, and they're just trying to. We got 2 days. What?
Safety
my
training.
goodness! Another safety training. Another. And the guy that's been here for 30 years. I've done 100 of these. This is going to be a cakewalk. You know. And honestly, if that's the mindset going in, it's really almost impossible to make someone see it any differently. Right. Now, in your experience, this is the most different safety training you've ever had, because it's focusing on leadership. You know, the individual being the leader.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I feel like you tend to be a natural leader yourself. You tend to lead people to ideas, ideologies. You're good at explaining what you care about. But more so, I think that you emotionally care about people's well-being.
Yeah.
That comes from a place of caring. So is that what drew you to the program initially? What kind of drew you in, and how have you maintained that level of care?
Boy, there's a lot there. I'm just taking a minute.
And your journey to it is very different than anyone else's, which I think is valuable.
Let me mention that. Yeah. So I began in education. For almost 20 years, I was a high school principal, which, every time I say it, I just see people shudder, like, oh, the guy gets me in trouble.
Am I in trouble with the principal here?
But my approach has always been different. I'm not an authoritarian. I really dislike authority, actually.
Yeah. Which is interesting, because you're a principal,
Well, because that's how most people approach it. It's like, I am in charge. My law is word, or my word is law. That's never been my approach. I like working with people, and people are really frustrating, right? I mean, it's just kind of the nature of it.
Right.
We take a long time to change. We never really get to deep, meaningful conversations. So I like working with people.
Right.
What I really like is seeing the spark and seeing someone's eyes light up and be like, oh, I never thought of it that way, or, oh, there is a different path. So that's what's brought me here. And actually, you talk about care. I think fundamentally humans always care about other humans. Okay. And that's actually how I start these, is with that. That's our first premise.
Really?
Yep, that's first right out of the gate.
The groundwork you lay down.
Well, because like you talk about, like people come like, oh, 2 days of safety training. So right out of the gate, I come in and I'm like, you care about your coworkers. I'm like, no, I don't, man. These guys. And I'm like, okay, well, do you want them hurt today? Do you want?
You asked them that. You say
straight up.
Wow.
Do you want someone killed today? Do you want a fatality? No. Okay, well, think of that ornery old guy, the Jordan.
Yeah.
Think of that old guy that you don't like. Do you want him hurt or killed today? No.
Not today.
Not today. Maybe next week, and I get kind of the humor. It's like, well, that's what we call caring. You actually do care about people. So let's just lay the groundwork. And very matter of fact, if you don't care about people, I really think you should leave right now. Because for 2 days,
You say that in the training?
I say it.
Have people gotten up and left ever?
No.
Wow.
Well, no, not from that, no.
Yeah.
So, sometimes people are like, well, this is a lot. Like I've had a recent event.
Yeah.
Someone had a child pass away a few weeks prior, and they're like, this is too raw for me. But that is the premise. If we don't care for people, then why bother? Like, honestly, just save yourself the time.
Just collect the paycheck,
Or go find a different career path, man.
Yeah.
Like, go farm or do something where you're away from people that don't demand care.
Right.
But in this field, you must care for your coworker. Because if you don't, someone will get hurt and someone will die. And if we can't make that fundamental agreement, then we just need to part ways right here.
And the field you're speaking to is a lot of our clients do large manufacturing or production of products and goods. And that's interesting you bring that up, because people don't think about that when they go shopping at the store, pulling something off the shelf. They don't think about the person making it.
Oh, yeah.
But you're there caring about the person making it.
Yeah, I never thought of that.
You're behind that fourth wall, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
Of you, the person that made that shampoo bottle could have lost a finger on accident, not being safe or something, because that machine, and you're seeing that from the inside.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know both of us have our own personal experiences with that, right? And and so to also my belief system about caring is to make things human again. So that can of cat food is human. Thousands of hours of humanity have gone into this.
Yeah.
And if you think about it that way, it's kind of cool, right? It's like, oh, I'm giving my cat the love of thousands of people. Well, okay, so then we need to start at the base level, which is, okay, if you and I are in the cat food factory and I dislike you and I actively am sabotaging you, that's a problem. So we need to understand real quick that you and I care about each other. Even at a basic level, right? Like we don't have to hug each other and all this stuff. But we need to say, no, I care enough about you that I'm going to let you safely work and provide for your loved ones.
Right.
That's care.
Yeah.
And when both you and I are working like that, then our team works like that, then our plant works like that, and then the delivery guy that comes to get our cat food feels that we actually care. And we're like, hey man, when you deliver this product we've made, please do it safely because we don't want you to get hurt.
Right.
And my experience is, that's really how businesses and corporations work, but it doesn't feel that way. Most of the time it's like, oh, they're just these money hungry, greedy, da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, no, there actually are humans in there that we fundamentally do care about each other.
There's a common thing we say internally, which is every product comes from a frontline worker. Every dollar being made comes from a frontline worker. And then that leadership level of the business, we speak a lot to every single level depending on the needs.
Yeah.
It seems to me that it is lost at times. People will lose the fact that there is a person that's providing for their family, providing for their emotional health, their physical health.
Yeah.
To get that product on the shelf and have it be the best quality version of that product, that person has to care, right? From every single level of the company, and I would say you're aligning those people's wavelengths essentially, giving they're all singing the same note of care.
Yeah, hopefully.
And I think you've done an excellent job from what I've heard, and we've seen your reviews.
Thank you.
People always putting 100% in, and it means a lot to everybody to see that type of energy going into a room, and then to also maintain that energy for 2 days is hard. It's incredibly hard.
It's hard, yeah.
Yeah. So it's no joke.
It's more than caffeine, I'll tell you that.
Caffeine might be involved.
It helps, but it doesn't keep you going. Yeah.
So Matt, I'd love to ask, what's something that that you've been asked in any of these sessions, or a story that's come up that you like to retell? Is there any thing that stands out that you like to tell people, like, I do this for work, here's something that happened that's interesting,
Ooh, a story.
Because you're a great storyteller.
Yeah, thank you. I tell a lot of my stories from my past, which were horrible mess ups. Mm-hmm. So, I mentioned I was a high school principal for 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, 20 years ago, I was in my late 20s, which means I did not do a good job managing people.
But you're not in your late 20s right now? You're not?
No. It's been a few years, Jordan. And so if I back up a little, I want to touch on something you said. Mm-hmm. I grew up working on a family farm, and then I graduated into working for family-run businesses because this is a small agricultural state, and so I never really worked for these big corporations. And what happens, when you're on a family farm, well, people care about you, right? And it. It doesn't often feel like love. It feels like screaming and cussing a lot. But at the end of the day, they love you. And when it's a small family business, enough about personal lives that there is a level of care. Sure. And as we get into these really big corporations or operations, it's still there, but it becomes very hidden.
It's subconscious.
Right. Yeah. Like if I work at a plant with 1,000 people, how do I possibly know 1,000 people's names and 1,000 people's stories? It's impossible, right? Yeah. And so you become very unhuman to me. You're just that guy that I see that walks down the hall.
You can be a stranger at a certain level.
Yeah. And so I would say more, so I do have my stories. More what I try to do is get people to tell their stories. And what I have found, and again, this is the first hour. We actually do care about each other. We all have things that we live for and are passionate about. And to me, that's the beauty of this is
Yeah.
I want to hear your story. I want to hear what makes you tick. And then I want to ask you the question like, hey, Jordan, you have this really important thing in your life. That's actually why you show up to work. So how do I get you to make the decisions that help you with that very important thing?
Love that.
Family, some people it's a pet. Sometimes I hear bowling leagues or, different things.
And it sounds trivial, but it really isn't.
It isn't.
It isn't. Yeah.
Well, and so if I go back to my speeding story, it's like, hey, Matt, you have 2 children at home. Would you like to get home tonight? Yeah, yes, I would. Okay, so what can we do to help get you home? Well, okay, I gotta drive in a way that I can get home. But see how it's a different conversation? Or if you come and say, hey, Matt, it's bad to speed. And I'm like, yeah, well,
you're
I'm gonna do what I want. Right.
Well, I'm safe still.
Right.
I'm good at driving.
But all you're doing is talking me through and it's like, okay, Matt, how do I get you home to those 2 beautiful kids of yours? I'm like, well, they're kind of young punks, they're teenagers, but I still love them, I still want to get home. I need to start making some different decisions so I can get back to that important stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the story that I would say is I have found universal. Everywhere in the world, every person I've talked to, some of them are different, right? They're certainly not my version of the stories a lot of the time. I don't bowl, but I remember one guy was adamant that he wanted to be there every Wednesday for his bowling team.
Really?
Yeah, and I was like, okay, right on, man. And I mean, that's an extreme story. Like he didn't have children. His parents had died. He didn't have siblings. So he didn't have a lot of like the typical family connections. He was a bit of an introvert. So probably didn't have a whole lot of friends, but he had his bowling buddies and he was going to be there every Wednesday. Like, right on, man. Well, let's get you to bowling league then.
Yeah.
So
I love that because you're finding and extracting what the values are for somebody.
Yeah.
And those values are not yours, but there's theirs, right? And you're saying, well, how does that impact your decision making here? If you lost your hand, how could you bowl without it? But it matters. It matters so much. And I think you touched on something important. I think is like you care a lot about your family and your family's needs. And everybody has the word family. I think is a broad term. It's who are you associating yourself with, and how can you trust those people, and how can they trust you? And I think when people say terms like the work family and things like that, it can be overused, right? But I think
feels cliche.
It feels cliche, but I think there really is some camaraderie there after the course has been taken, after the discussions have been had. I feel strongly that people want to have that at work too. They want to have some of that.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
None of us want to show up 8 hours a day for something we hate. For guys we don't like,
exactly.
Or, gals. Or,
30 years at the work, Jordan. You don't want to be angry at him every day.
Right, but you can already hear in our conversation. We're 15, 20 minutes in. Like very much, you get into personal things, and you really begin to learn people. And that's another story I hear all the time is, man, I worked with this guy for 20 years. I never knew anything. I didn't know anything about this.
I didn't know.
I'm like, well. So here's the technique, guys. How do I show up and within 20 minutes, you've now learned something different about someone you've worked with for 20 years? And I'm not a magician. There's techniques here.
And I believe strongly you've touched on something that's universal, is that every individual has a story.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's something important. And people aren't comfortable telling their story all the time. They don't feel like it's valuable. It's not worth telling. It's average, normal, boring.
Yeah.
I've heard the word, I'm too boring.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is that? You're not too boring. The fact that you're here today means you're not boring, right? So I think people want it, and I believe that our intention with people is to make them feel like they have a voice, that they have a way of impacting their own life, but the people around them. And it's important.
Like you say, like a lot of corporations, and I'm not speaking ill of corporations or companies.
There's the standard cliches of
but again, I'm a behaviorist, right? So, but there's these policies that will say, oh, well, we are a family, right? Or, oh, we care about each other.
Here's our core values. Here they are.
Right. But until I know you and until I understand you, it will never feel like family.
Absolutely.
And think immediately how that changes the dynamic. Because if now I know you're the ornery guy that's been here, but you love bowling, you and I now have a connection.
Right.
And I can now come up to you like, oh, hey, Thursday, man, Jordan, how was bowling last night? Right. Oh, hey, can I talk to you about this other thing? And see, it's just, again, like I said, I grew up on a family farm, and it was just much more like that. And, now all of a sudden, the difficulty of the work was still there. Mm-hmm. The unpleasantness of the work environment was still there.
Sure.
And we had each other's backs.
Right.
And I think that's really what we demand as humans, is once we feel that we can be trusted and that I understand you, mm-hmm. we want each other's backs. And I hear all the time that, you talk about, oh, my story's boring.
Right.
What I hear all the time is, no one's ever asked me my story.
Really?
Well, think about it. Think of the places you've worked. When did someone actually come up and just spend 10 minutes to hear your story and say, no, tell me your story, Jordan. I'm going to take you to lunch.
Even as simple as, what was your weekend like?
Yeah, but not like, yo, bro, how was your weekend? But like, no, how was your weekend? Tell me, walk me through it. Okay, wow. Why did you go grocery shopping on Saturday morning instead of Saturday afternoon? Or what's in your thought process?
Or is there a birthday that happened you didn't know about, or something they never would have told you? That's a good point.
Well, and I look at my work, and I was the boss for many years. I didn't do that well. I didn't know my people. Mm-hmm. I was just like, oh, there's Jordan. He shows up. He usually shows up 10 minutes late. That's really annoying. Oh man, I don't like that guy. I'm going to write him up in my annual review that he shows up late.
Right.
Where if it was like, oh, I understood your story, maybe you have young kids, maybe school starts later, and it just creates a radically different work environment.
That camaraderie becomes a core part of the relationship, this understanding of their needs.
Well, and then we're actually putting in practice the idea of these policies, which is we are humans and we want to be treated like humans. So then maybe I can say, hey, Jordan, why don't we just start your shift 20 minutes later? Then you'll always be on time. You don't feel bad. I don't feel bad. And I'm going to have to ask you to do some different things that I maybe don't ask other people.
Right.
Isn't that what we all want anyway?
I think compromise is something that's usually seen as a bad thing, but I think understanding is really what people are trying to say when they're saying compromise, is that we understand each other. It's not that we're making losses on both sides.
Sure.
We're having an understanding of what we can do together.
Or maybe I don't have the liberty to let you come in 20 minutes later.
Yeah.
At least there's understanding now. Mm-hmm. And you and I can now work well together.
And you're not working under fear anymore. Like, oh, I'm scared,
right.
I'm scared,
exactly.
I'm scared. And being scared is probably the worst state to be in of anything, across the board.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and then we, also we'll get into the psychology of your brain. And I can tell you right now, if you're feeling fear, you're not thinking.
No.
And now I have you out on machinery that can kill you, and you're not thinking.
You're just scared about getting stuff out faster and better and faster, and eventually you have an accident.
Yeah. It will happen. Mm-hmm. And really, and I think too often we try and dress like, oh, well, they didn't follow the rules, or there wasn't this guarding, and it's like, no, there's a much deeper reason going on here. Jordan's been working out of fear. Mm-hmm. Let's say this. Now let me flip the table. If you and I had this discussion, how much would you enjoy coming to work?
In the workplace, I would feel like
if I was your
Matt's
boss,
got my back.
And how long would you stay with the company?
A 30-minute discussion could last years. Could keep somebody who's fearful. If you were my boss in that context, and you're like, hey, I care about you and your weekend and that sort of thing, that can change the entire outcome for someone's career trajectory. You go.
I just bought your loyalty for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so, you started off asking like, well, how do we measure these outcomes? Well, it's hard.
Yeah.
But why not give you the benefit of the doubt? Why not at least open the door for you to potentially work here for 20 years?
Yeah.
Right. Think of the cost savings there.
Well, and this is what's interesting is there's KPIs tied to all these things. There's ways to track those things. There's data, but data is looking at the past, right? What we're doing is we're looking at the future.
Right.
And the future is not written, right? It's something that we're trying to write together.
Which is scary.
It's terrifying. And that's also a fear-based mindset of I don't know what's going to happen, therefore I don't know if I can keep you here even, right? But I think what the core is people often ask me, why don't they just do this themselves without you intervening? Why can't we do this without you? Well, a lot of the times, having a third party is what is required to make change. And we teach that in our course, that having a third party is what is required for somebody to reinforce an ideology. Yeah. And I believe that you know that better than anybody, that having that third party opinion and having that camaraderie is what starts that change, right? And you're that third party coming in when you go to every single location. You're coming in as a third party, independent voice, but giving people a safe space to have a platform to speak in.
Well, and that's really the power of our company is we are always the third party.
Yeah.
So we get to walk in neutral. And I get to walk in, which I love.
I'm not afraid of you either. Yeah.
Right, but then I get to come in and like I said, in the first 10 minutes, I get to immediately establish a different tone.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I have very rarely felt that in the places I've worked.
Yeah.
I hear a lot that people haven't, and it's really kind of sad, and it's reality, right? Because and then we get in all these things like, well, I've been taught at work not to really open up. I've been taught not to be social. I've been taught don't waste time. All these things.
Compliance is
but then we start getting into how that plays out, and it's like, well, yeah, no wonder no one likes their job. I'm never treated as a human. No one knows what makes me tick. I can't really talk about my personal life.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying we just dump everything.
Yeah.
I'm saying, so again, this is something I talk a lot about is the fine line and the balance. Because it's there, and there is a way for me to still be very professional with you.
Right.
And have work boundaries and understand you and understand what makes you a human. And I'm telling you right now, I find the place that treats me like that, I'm there the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And now that I've said that, I really do feel like Alitrust and Through Safety treat me that way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which that's why you have me for 4 years, right? Like I'm not looking.
You're high value add to the team, and we don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think to kind of sum things up, you care about the individual and their behavior and the core the subconscious they have of where they're at. They may not know that, but you have the experience to really see through the noise and capture and find that their story, and you're willing to ask them their story.
That's really it. I'm willing to ask.
I like that,
and I have the luxury and the time to do it.
That's so great.
Which I love, right?
Yeah. Well, Matt, we're about at time.
Okay.
So thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for hearing me.
And we'll hopefully talk to you soon again about more of your experience.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah.